Yo, what's up? It's been a minute. Back to do another chess tournament. Hold on, I'm trying to figure out when. Oh, just cook the 6-year old.
don't want to waste this. Right. And then later on, in terms of your original question, the difference in that was that I I realized, okay, there's something out there
Oh,
in
you better play
that I
Magnus.
can't totally explain on naturalistic terms. But how do we go from that to saying, okay, well then this worldview is correct? And so, despite being raised in a Christian home, I felt like my
Yeah,
parents
go up.
telling me what was true is not the worst reason to believe it, but it's also not.
Guessing right here.
And so, as a
Nope.
teenager, I did a lot of.
He brings. So he went
Like
boom.
I said, I was able to do that.
Then he goes boom.
Openness within council.
Oh, interesting.
Where
Interesting.
I pulled the Quran off the shelf and I read it front to back, just trying to figure out, okay, what's going on here? What's all this about? Right. And it was through that period of like searching, and it wasn't a crisis of faith. That's maybe exaggerating term, but it was kind of inspirational faith. Maybe, yeah, digging through. Okay, well, what do these guys believe? Right. What is this perspective? Right. And that was about a year and a half. And at the end of that, I did truly feel that, okay, well, I think in the ways that my limited ability as a teenager to investigate these things, I think that Christianity is true. But it wasn't until I went to university where I was engaging with people of other faith perspectives in Toronto at York University, where I was talking to Muslims and Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Nathans, from the gamut. And I was having these conversations, and I was expressing kind of my perspective on what I believe. And they would say things like, well, that sounds great, Wes, but, that's all the Bible. You can't trust that. And so that's where I started to take the Mormon side of it. Well, yes. Yeah. Well, in the sense that, so, the Mormon was the craziest one. Yeah. We know who wrote it. Yeah. And he's a shady dude. He is a shady dude. Well, they did in the sense that the Book of Mormon trumps the Bible. So they would believe, I think it's the 10th article of the Mormon Church, is that they believe the Bible insofar as it is translated. And so they have this perspective that there's been things that have been affected. I mean, Joseph Smith made his own translation of the Bible. And when he was 14. Well, I think it was later on that he made the Joseph Smith translation. But I don't even know if the official LDS Church ascribes to the Joseph Smith translation, because I think they even see like this is, we know what the Greek and the Hebrew looks like, and this is not even. Yeah. Well, he was a legitimate con man. Yeah, which is fascinating. That people have such a deep search for meaning and truth that if you are confident, and which is what a con man is, confidence man. If you are really good at expressing yourself and really you show confidence in your convictions, you can persuade a lot of people. Yeah, confidence is not competency. Yeah. And unfortunately, those things get confused a lot. It covers up for competency sometimes. Yeah. In religion, in politics, like all sorts of things, right? Everything. Yeah. I think because people want to, it's very difficult to be an expert in the subject, and I think people want to believe that they are, and they don't want to do the work, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's why experts themselves feel a lot of inadequacy. Is because they study a subject and realize, I'm never going to get to the bottom of this. Right. So, unfortunately, subjects are very, very nuanced. Yeah. You're talking about things that were a oral tradition for a long time before they were even written down. So it's a long trudge to get to the bottom of things. Yeah. And part of the whole, what I was trying to get Billy in that conversation that I had with him to get to the bottom of, partly was a question of methodology. I think he got frustrated with me at one point because I kept asking, what are the criteria that you're using when you're looking at one source versus another source and coming up with a conclusion? Because in historiography, it's the inference to the best explanation. And so there are different ways that you go about that, different methodologies. And historians very rarely disagree on the data and the evidence. It's the conclusions that you draw from that. But then there are some things that are just out and out false. And I don't think Billy totally knew what I was talking about, but it's those criteria that we look at when we look at something that does come from like an oral tradition and eventually gets written down and becomes a literary text. And then you analyze that on the basis of being a literary text.
This is sort of the problem between with being self-taught rather than conventionally academically trained.
Definitely.
Where you're trained in very specific disciplines and you're taught to understand the foundation for you understand like how to put a window.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that you have to know from the base, from the beginning. Like, do you have a water line? Do you have power? Like, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things going on when you're trying to construct an expertise in something, especially something that is so complicated. And one of the things that I've gotten out of playing, I've probably watched probably 20 hours of your stuff over the last couple of weeks. You've spent a lot of time on this. This is not a casual cursory examination of these texts and of religion. This is a long, long journey. That's what's particularly exceptional and really interesting to me. Because I'm always fascinated by people that have really gone down the road. Like really, really, really gone down the road. Because you don't meet a whole lot of them. You know, I know a lot of Christians that can quote you some versions of the New Testament, some Psalms, but the real, the go all the way to the back, way. And that's what you've done. That's very interesting. So this is like, how old are you?
30.
Which is very young for someone who has the depth of knowledge that you have. So you've been doing this essentially from that miraculous moment that ignited this spark, even though you came from a missionary background, and then from then on. So for the past 11 years, 12 years, or 20 years, 30 years, like it's your whole life essentially. It's all been this.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, I went to university with full intention of going into this course. I did like my undergraduate studies, and then I kind of mapped out this plan that I was going to become a police detective, and that was my goal. And I think I realized.
Why not? Would you like to get bottom things? Because you do.
Yeah. Well,
when someone spent 21 years looking at the bottom of the list, you probably be pretty good at cases.
I hope so. I think that might have been part of it. I also.
Hi, I'm five-time U.S. champion Hikaru Nakamura. Ready to learn some shot?
Like I felt that like the pressure.
Moment in life.
Man, I always tell people when they're in high school, like, chill out. Like it's gonna be okay.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? I wonder if it's different now.
You have a certain amount of desperation. It ignites the fire within you to do something.
There's probably something to that.
Yeah, the people that I know that have been too pampered and taken care of and didn't have fear of everything going completely sideways, they never really get the momentum that's necessary to accomplish things in life.
Yeah, there's probably something to that. I mean, desperation.
A little desperation and fear, I think, is good for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be comfortable. I don't think that's necessarily a good path. I mean, I think you should have perspective and you should enjoy your life as a young person and have those, but you should also.
Well, stress is good, right? Stress creates perseverance and creates patterns that allow you to succeed.
Yes.
I mean, this is like athletics 101, right?
I think that's very.
You gotta push yourself, and I think actually part of that also led in. Like, I'm a big believer in athletic discipline needs to go hand in hand. I mean, I know you are too. Needs to go hand in hand with any other type of like whether it's an intellectual endeavor or like because it trains you to be able to go into places that are comfortable.
Yes.
And that uncomfortability allows you to then become stronger. Realize where your inadequacies are. And especially when you're with people who are better than you. I mean, when I was running at York University, there were two guys on our team who, because I was okay individually, but I ran for the relay team, and I was a sprinter. And one of the guys was part of the they medaled when Canada medaled at Worlds. He was part of that relay team, and then my other training partner, Busy, who he ended up competing in Tokyo for Canada. And when you're beside someone who is like just a genetic freak, you're like, oh, okay, like that's different,
Yeah.
right? And it both pushes you, but it also reveals your limitations. Where that doesn't inhibit you, like that shouldn't discourage you to go up to that line of being able to push yourself. But at the exact same time, it creates a real that like I can train as much as I want to. I'm not gonna run like that, right? And so yeah, but going back to what you were asking, like I think there was part of that in wanting to go into my sports, but then realizing around my third year of university that my passions and motivations were very, very different, and that I didn't know how to go about that, where the proper place to do that was, but I knew that I needed to lean into that to some degree, particularly with the Bible, because I was claiming that this Bible talks about this guy Jesus, and I'm a Christian. So I have a friend, Abby Bannister. He's out in the UK, and he says if you take Christ out of Christian, all your life is the same. And he's a great guy, but he's not going to save you from your sins. And so, like, if I'm wrong about the Bible, those people who push back on me, right, those skeptics of various worldviews, if the things they were saying about the Bible were true, then it did actually legitimately undermine what I believed. So I needed to have an obligation to actually investigate those things as far as I can.
We're talking about playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Scoring touchdowns is key to winning the playoffs, and you can score big by betting on them at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your bet? Try betting on something simple like a player to score 6. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code ROGAN. That's code ROGAN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over, age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/.
Trying to predict the future is a method of observation. The only thing we can be sure of is that it will be absolutely fantastic. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough in communication satellite. These things make it possible for a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other wherever we may be. When that time comes, we can work stronger.
A disaster transforms your home into a place of chaos. But everything that could go wrong does. This is the world of Paul Davis Restoration, where our experts are ready, trained, and equipped to restore your home to make things right. Paul Davis Property Restoration Experts. When things go wrong, we do what's right.
What is the oldest version of the Bible that restores the Bible? Is it the Dead Sea Scrolls or are there older versions?
The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest of the Old Testament. So when they were discovered, so they were discovered in 1946 to 1957. And at that point, during their discovery, they pushed back a lot of our previous oldest manuscripts 1,000 years, which was a big deal.
How old are they?
They're anywhere between the 3rd century BC and the 1st century BC. So it's kind of tricky because the Dead Sea Scrolls they're like a library that we refer to. So it's approximately 970 documents, but it's distributed out between 10,000 and 11,000 fragments. So there's a lot going on there, right? So, and some of these, I mean, are so fragmentary that you look at them and it's like, because they're, I mean, 3,000 years old, but not quite that. They're like 2,000 plus years old. Animal skins. Yeah, well, all sorts of things. Animal skins, papyri, and then some of them are actually done on copper. They're like inscribed in copper. Oh, yeah, one of the coolest ones. Actually, this relates because I know you're a Marco Allegro guy. The first time I was introduced to Marco Allegro was not his Sacred Mushroom of the Cross stuff, but he published a book on what's called the Copper Scroll, because part of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments is this inscribed document on copper, which is ancient treasure map. Yeah, James, pull up the, hey! Yeah. So it's in Hebrew, and it is wild. So it has these sites where it says buried treasure is found. And there have been a number of guys who have tried to like look for it, and so
Let's say what the treasure is.
you know what? Off the top of my head, I don't know. But look how crazy that is. I know, right? And so, but the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's stuff like this. It's papyri. It's animal skins, and it's a number of different languages. So the vast majority of it is Hebrew, but there's also a lot in Aramaic, and then Greek, and in Nabatean. So it's like an umbrella term to just describe a whole bunch of literature. So a lot of it is biblical because it was written by this group out in the desert called the Essenes who lived at Qumran. So, but then other stuff of it is just, it's just Jewish literature of various stripes that were hidden in caves all around the Dead Sea.
So the scrolls, as it were, aren't all biblical. Some of them is just accounting of the times.
Yeah. Oh, Jamie, look at that. 65 tons of gold and 26 tons of silver.
65 tons? That's a lot. That's a lot. How many Cuban links can you make out of that?
You can see why someone would try to track that down.
Boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, like you have ones like the Great Isaiah Scroll, which is fully complete. Like it's a copy of the book of Isaiah, and it's a full complete scroll. But then other ones are so fragmentary that we think they're written in Hebrew, but we can't actually tell. Oh, wow. Because no one's willing to like piece these. And this is true for a lot of stuff. So the largest grouping of papyri literature in the world is the Oxyrhynchus collection, which we get a good portion of our oldest manuscripts of the New Testament from. But if you go to Oxford and you look at the Oxyrhynchus collection, you pull out that drawer, it's like a jigsaw. You're like most of it is untranslated, untranscribed, because the amount of man-hours that it would just take to even put it together, never mind, then go to the effort of transcribing, translating it. Most people are not willing to do that.
And if you're missing chunks, how do you even make that puzzle connect?
Well, that's part of my area of specialty research is in regards to that. So I study paratextual features. We're really gonna get nerdy today.
Let's get nerdy.
So you look at the features of the manuscripts, not necessarily the words, but things like the spaces between the words, the development of punctuation, indentation or outdentation, and I look at the margins, and I try to, based on the average size of manuscripts in and around that time, and also the average spacing of words and the margins on the top, bottom, and the side, recreate what the manuscript could have possibly looked like.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So when you say the book of Isaiah is intact, how similar is it to the book of Isaiah that's in the Bible?
So that one is fascinating. So this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic text, which is in the Middle Ages. Whoa. Yeah, so it was literally 1,000 years. We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars, like I said, this isn't true for all Dead Sea Scrolls, but one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text. Word for word, word for word. Yeah. So this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. So if you go to Israel and
Wait,
you
is
go,
that papyrus?
yes. No, I think that one is vellum.
What is vellum?
So, so I should be more specific. So parchment is animal skin. Vellum can be used synonymously with the term parchment. Technically, parchment is like baby animal skin, like calves or lambs. But this is the Great Isaiah Scroll. You can see like they stitch together the parchment because it's so long.
God, it's so beautiful. The way they wrote back then was so beautiful. I mean, maybe it's because I can't read it. That's so fat. Maybe if I saw English, I would think that's beautiful too.
Yeah.
Especially script, like cursive. Cursive is very beautiful. But that is so fascinating because I mean, obviously coming from a point of ignorance, the letters look so similar. Like so many of this is the what I always got about cuneiform. When I look at that, I'm like, it's just one particular sort of character.
Yeah.
That's this way and that way and up and down and
Oh, cuneiform is wild. Weird. It's really, really tricky. And that's the thing when, like, if you're studying ancient languages and you start to study Greek, like, the Greek alphabet is similar enough that you're like, okay, alpha looks like an A, right? Delta looks like a D. So you can figure it out. And so it tricks you because you start off and you're like, oh, this is phobios, fear. I don't know what phobia is. And you get this whole sense of like encouragement. And then, you know, the further you go down the road, further like, oh, I'm screwed. So, but Hebrew is completely the opposite because the like writing system is so different. The learning curve is hard at the beginning, and then you're like, everything is just 3 letters with a suffix added to it. And so it feels like, whereas the opposite is true with Greek, you're like, oh, I get this. And then when you really go down the rabbit hole, you're like, oh crap, none of the things that I learned about that are supposed to be standard, all of them have exceptions.
wow.
But yeah, cuneiform's a wild one.
Do you know what Rick Strassman is?
No.
He's a scholar and he did a lot of work, early work, FDA approved work on psychedelics, and he spent 16 years teaching himself to read ancient Hebrew. Yeah, so because he wanted to really understand the Bible from the original source of ancient Hebrew and to understand it in context. And since ancient Hebrew, the way the words are structured, is so different than English, and that something must be lost in translation. So he spent 16 years teaching himself how to read ancient Hebrew. That is such dedication. 16 years.
It's a long time. That seems too long.
Well, you're self-taught. I mean, he's doing it himself.
Yeah. Self-teaching. Yeah. I self-taught myself Greek at first, and then when I started learning it formally, I realized how much you miss when you self-teach
Oh,
yourself.
I'm sure. Well, how many people can teach ancient Hebrew? How many courses are available?
Oh, you can take it at any graduate college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it? It's not something that we know what it sounds like, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big debate with ancient languages.
Right.
Like, same thing with, arguably, we don't know how any of this was pronounced.
Right.
I mean, modern Greek speakers get really mad at me when I say that because they're like, of course we know it's pronounced like we pronounce it, right? And on all my videos where I'm like site translating Greek manuscripts, there's so many comments of modern Greek speakers getting mad at how I pronounce things. But realistically, yeah, we don't really know how most of the things are pronounced with anything.
But isn't that very bizarre when you translate? Like if you go back to, let's say, the Epic of Gilgamesh, we don't even know what the words sounded like.
Yeah.
We kind of know what they represent, and then we do a literal translation of what they represent. But if you've never heard, no one can speak ancient Sumerian.
Yeah. Well, Sumerians are wild because it's a language isolate. So Hebrew is an Afro-Semitic language. So Hebrew is related to all of these other languages like Aramaic and Akkadian, but language isolates have no adjacent comparisons.
Whoa.
So, because I tried to teach myself Sumerian and I failed and I just gave up because I couldn't do it because I had nothing to really compare it to.
Right.
So Sumeriologists are very they're a field of their own. because I learned a little bit of Akkadian because I had studied Semitic languages, and there's enough crossover between things like Hebrew and Aramaic and Akkadian, but Sumerian you have nothing to compare it to. And
What did it eventually become?
it just died.
It just died.
It just died.
How? Do we know?
I mean, the Sumerians lost to the Syrians, and the Assyrians got taken over by the Babylonians. And I mean, it's just the course of history where things happen. But there are a number of ancient languages that are language isolates, like Linear Elamite. We had no idea what Linear Elamite even said until 2021.
Well, I never heard it until 5 seconds ago.
I know. There you go, Jamie. If you pull up, if you look up, what's it called? There's a cup, silver cup. It'll come up if you Google image Linear Elamite, because you think cuneiform looks black. Linear Elamite is completely different than that too. And there's a silver cup, which we had no idea what it said, and then a bunch of researchers, ancient Near Eastern researchers, developed. Well, so let's look in the corner there. That one on
Far left corner?
no, here, now it's moved because you clicked it. That one, yeah, click that. So that's Linear Elamite. And so that's in and around the same time that languages like Sumerian. So there's this very interesting kind of, if we're talking about a story in the Bible, like the Tower of Babel, where it says that God confused their languages, and everybody started speaking different languages, you have these languages that just pop up, and out of nowhere, and have no relation with one another. So Akkadian starts to adopt certain words in Sumerian, but they're still Sumerian words. It's like pizza is Italian, right? Or like kayak is Inuit. But when you're looking at the words that carry over, it's not because there's a relationship between Akkadian and Sumerian. It's because you have these cultures that live side by side, and eventually Akkadian starts to adopt these things. But Sumerian is, so that's why when I see people like Billy Carson talk about being able to read Sumerian, I'm like, dude, I read ancient languages and I can't. I've tried and I can't make heads or tails of Sumerian.
Yeah.
So
That's a tell.
unfortunately, it kind of gives away.
Listen, I like Billy. He was a nice guy. I really enjoy talking to him. I really do. I think his videos are fun. But I also think truth is important.
I have no problem with him as an individual.
He just needs to course correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, course correct and recognize what you know and what you don't know. And you're not doing people a service, especially people like myself that aren't educated in this. Like we turn to others who claim to have vast knowledge of this to help me out. Tell me what's going on. When I sit down and talk to you, tell me what's going on. And if you don't really know, you're fucking over a lot of people, unfortunately, for yourself.
Yeah.
This how do you say it again? Linear Elamite. Can you put that back up again, Jamie? So this was can you show me that image that you showed me before?
Actually, see if you can find the cup.
That's pretty dope. Right
If you scroll, there should be a cup. I think it's called the dashed.
Is that it? In the lower part?
No.
Is that the cup?
No, if you guys, it's got, yeah, if you look up cup, yeah, that guy. So see that inscription at the top beside the face?
Yeah.
So that's the one, so it goes around the top of the cup, and they crack that.
Look at that dude's honker.
He's got a big nose.
That's a hell of a nose.
Yeah, you can smell that when you're eating. And so actually, interestingly enough, if you go back, Jamie, that's my, so there's an infographic that I made that just popped up. So if you click that
Right
guy,
there.
that's the one I made. Why is it coming up like that? Okay.
So is it just bad resolutions or everything? Oh, there.
Oh, no, that's mine.
That's
So
yours. Okay.
actually, here, I'll be self-serving. If you go to wesleyhuff.com,
That is so. Can we just look at that for a second? That is so cool. And how old is this?
20th century BC.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 4,000 plus years ago.
Yeah. So if you go, Jamie, to wesleyhuff.com and then click my infographics tab at the top. So I started making these things for the graduate students I was teaching. And yeah, so if you go down, there should be an archaeology section. And in the archaeology section, I have that one on, I can know what it's called. I make much for manuscripts.
What a great website you've got.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate
This
it.
is awesome. It's so detailed.
Yeah, so So there's a linear Elamite one.
What a fucking phenomenal resource this is.
Right
Oh,
there.
there it is.
Yeah, Marv Dash. That's what it's called. So yeah, you see this. So I have Sumerian, Linear Elamite, Akkadian, and Caleb Hebrew there at the bottom as comparisons. And these are languages that operated like alongside one another, but are almost completely foreign to one another. So there is crossover between Akkadian and Caleb Hebrew.
So that's interesting. Sumerian, when I'm thinking of cuneiform, I'm not thinking of that, right? That looks different than some of like the clay scrolls, where the imprintations they make with a clay wheel.
Yeah, well, it's all done with the stylus. So it's like a little wedge stylus. So there are different variations of it, but ultimately it's done with the stylus. The thing that's interesting, like you're probably thinking more of what that later Akkadian looks like, right? Where it's like the wedges.
Yeah.
So the Akkadian basically borrowed the writing system, and it had development over time, but it's very
So when they
close.
conquered them, did they have their own writing system initially and just incorporated Sumerian writing to theirs?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that,
Mm.
but
God, I'd love to know.
I know, right?
I mean, it's so long ago, but not. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, it's so long ago in terms of a human life,
yeah.
but it's not that long. You think like, we went from 4,000 years ago to that to large language models.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, quantum computing.
Yeah. Well, even if you look at language systems develop. Paleo Hebrew turns into what we saw in the Dead Sea Scrolls, whereas Paleo Hebrew is a little bit different than what we eventually see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's like a development within the language, and then modern Hebrew adopts the Hebrew in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but modern Hebrew has this vowels that were developed in the Middle Ages to figure out how to pronounce it. Because basically, ancient Hebrew doesn't have a vowel system in its writing that's overly comprehensive. And so in the Middle Ages, when you have these groups of Jews who are copying these Hebrew scriptures, who aren't speaking it as much as they're reading it, you gotta figure out how to pronounce it because vowels make a difference. But if you took all the vowels out of English, if you're a natural English reader, you could probably figure out what was what if you're looking at a page. And so in the Middle Ages, the Masoretic scribes come up with these vowel pointing systems, and that's what you see when you like look at the Bible today. Is you see these vowels, and sometimes like the introduction or removal of the vowel is significant in the changing of words.
It's also interesting, and we're kind of seeing language change, written language, while right now in this current era because we've kind of abandoned cursive.
Yeah.
Right? So if people in the future go to read ancient scripts of human beings that lived in the 20th century, they'll be like, "What is this shit?"
Yeah.
And then, if there wasn't a lot of it, like there's no cursive on the internet. It is cursive, but I mean, no websites are written in cursive.
Yeah, it's all
few of
printed.
these. It's all printed.
Yeah.
And so they've essentially, in schools, stopped teaching. Most classes don't teach cursive. Like, we all learned cursive as children. It was the way you could write things quicker.
Yeah.
And then once printing and typewriters and computers became ubiquitous, like it's gone.
Yeah.
And everybody's just texting.
Yeah. Well, let's hope people in the future are still able to read the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
Like, because that's what was
Right.
written, right? Stuff like that.
That's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were not taught that, and then you went to read that, and you said, "This is English," like, what are you talking about? Like, I recognize a few of these letters, but it's so vastly different than the printed text.
Yeah. Language models are wild.
Wild.
Yeah.
The whole thing is wild that people figured out how to associate sounds with little symbols, and then they did completely different shit in Korea, completely different shit in Russia.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. And then you have to have these experts who can translate these things, and you depend upon them forever.
Mhm.
Which that was what Lutheranism was all about, right? Like Martin Luther wanted to have phonetic translations of the Bible, and there was a lot of resistance to that because the people that knew how to read Latin were like, "Hey, slow down."
Yeah. Partly, I mean, there were proto-reformers before Luther. Were guys like Wycliffe. So John Wycliffe and William Tyndale both translated the Bible, parts of the Bible into English, and they predate it. I mean, and they were very popular for you. I mean, Wycliffe was declared
If you're wondering, that was the best move.
Of the word. But yeah,
And after he's already dead.
yeah. Well, Tyndale's line was that he wanted, I believe it was Tyndale. It was either Wycliffe or Tyndale. My friends who are specialists in this are going to get mad at me for this. But one of those two guys said that they wanted the plowboy to be able to read the Bible and know what it's supposed to.
What are you doing in this scenario?
That was the motivation. Is that they're like, public education
A sacrifice.
in these areas was.
But then,
They just wanted people to read the Bible. But
no, bro, literally all I have to do is just go here. Alright.
Because part of his kind of kicking off of the what we call the Protestant Reformation was that he read the Bible in Greek. Because there was a guy named Desiderius Erasmus who was they call them humanists, but they mean something different than that. Humanists were like scholars who were trying to figure out the entirety of human knowledge up until that point, like Renaissance men, kind of, right? So Desiderius Erasmus is like one of the last true Renaissance men, but he was compiling, and he produced the first printed edition of the New Testament, and so he comes out with this printed edition of the New Testament. Luther gets his hand on his name, and so he's reading that, and he notices that in Matthew's Gospel, the word that's in the Latin is penitentiam agite, do penance. In Greek is metanoite, which is repentance. And the church was using this as like, you need to do penance. You need to, do all of this stuff to show that you're sorry. And part of that was, paying the church. And Luther reads this and he goes, hey, guys, this means something different. This means repentance. It means changing your mind. It doesn't mean like to actually do things. And so part of this motivation is like the Latin isn't reflecting, at least at the point that Latin had developed in that day. Like maybe when Jerome translates the Latin Vulgate back in the 4th century, and it's called the Vulgate because Vulgata means like regular. Like you think of vulgar, right? It's just the regular people language. Part of the reason was that in the 4th century, very few people were reading Greek. They were reading Latin. And so they're like, hey, Jerome, you need to produce a Bible in Latin because nobody can read the Bible anymore. And so he produces the Latin Vulgate. And ironically, by the time you get to Luther, 1,000 years later, no one can read Latin. And they're all using the Vulgate.
Wow. That is fascinating. Wow.
And even Erasmus was, so he dedicates his first 2 editions to the Pope because he knows the Pope is going to get wind that he's producing Greek New Testaments, and the church is using Latin, and he's risking his life. So if he dedicates it to the Pope, maybe the Pope will take it easy on him.
Did it work?
Yeah, that did.
Nice. Little flattery.
Yeah, see, it goes a long way.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? Is that you're dealing with these priests, you're dealing with human beings. And when human beings are the sole purveyors of truth, that it becomes a problem. It's power. It's too much power. Most people suck at power. They're just it just makes them drunk with it, and they abuse it. And you see that in many religions. You see that in cults. Yeah, for instance, is the best example of it because like when you know the person who created this thing, this person is fucking insane, and you have a bunch of people that follow them.
They're just looking out for your best interest, Joe.
Yeah,
Right? They just want to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Did you see Wild Wild Country?
Flu.
Yes.
What are you doing here?
It's so good.
Oh,
It's
man.
so crazy. I mean,
Me
I'm so
personally.
glad I wasn't a part of it. They all look good at the beginning. That's what's really wild. All these cult documentaries, all these exposés, in the beginning, like these people have it made. They're all eating together, and they're communicating, they're praying together, and they seem
They're just seeking
wonderfully
enlightenment.
happy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways my wife and I bond, we have very different tastes in movies, but there's enough crossover that our guilty pleasure is cult documentaries.
I love them.
They're so
I love them.
interesting.
I love them because there's something about people like absolutely believing things that's so appealing to me. I don't know why that is. Like I like watching Islamic scholars speak, with like full.
Alright, boys, I'm tired.